The first thing she said when she sat across from me was, "I'm sorry, I wore my work uniform." Her voice was so quiet that I almost missed the second sentence. "If you still want to leave, I'll understand." I looked at the woman sitting nervously at the other side of the table, at the faded blue uniform, the tired shoes, and the hand she kept hiding beneath the table, and I realized she wasn't apologizing for being late. She was apologizing for not looking like the kind of woman she thought a man like me deserved. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. My name is Caleb Mercer, and at 36, I had become very good at pretending I didn't care about being alone. My apartment was clean, my career was stable, my refrigerator was full, and my life looked perfectly respectable from the outside. I worked as a project manager for a construction company in Columbus, Ohio, and most mornings I left home before the streets became crowded, carrying the same black coffee and the same quiet feeling that something important was missing. I had once believed love would happen naturally, the way it did in movies and in the stories my parents told about meeting each other at a county fair. But after a broken engagement and 3 years of burying myself in work, I had stopped expecting anything. My younger sister, Marissa, refused to accept that. She said I had confused peace with loneliness and insisted that I give blind dating one more chance. I told her I had already given dating more chances than it deserved. She laughed and said, "Then give one person a chance instead." That was how I ended up at a small Italian restaurant on a warm Saturday afternoon, sitting beside a window while sunlight spilled across the white tablecloth. Marissa had arranged the date with a woman named Eliana Brooks, telling me almost nothing except that she was kind, hardworking, and the exact opposite of the women you usually choose. I had arrived 10 minutes early, partly because I hated making people wait and partly because I wanted time to decide whether I could escape before she arrived. Then the restaurant door opened, and Eliana walked in. She stopped just inside, scanning the room with an expression that immediately told me she wanted to disappear. She was wearing a blue work uniform, the kind I recognized from the cleaning staff at hospitals and medical buildings. Her hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, there was a faint crease across one cheek as though she had been wearing a mask, and one of her shoes had a small tear near the heel. She looked at the table number on her phone, then at me, and for one heartbreaking second, I watched her confidence collapse. She approached slowly, sat down, and apologized before I could even greet her. "I'm sorry, I wore my work uniform," she said, twisting her fingers together. "I thought I'd have time to go home and change, but someone called in sick, and my supervisor needed me to stay." She gave a nervous smile that disappeared almost immediately. "I can leave if this makes you uncomfortable." I looked at her, then at the empty chair, and suddenly understood that someone had taught this woman to expect rejection before she even gave people a chance to know her. I smiled and told her, "I still want this date." Her eyes lifted toward mine, almost suspiciously, as if she was waiting for the joke. I added that I had come to meet Eliana, not an outfit, and something in her face softened. She laughed quietly, and that tiny laugh was the first beautiful thing that happened that afternoon. The conversation surprised me from the beginning. Eliana didn't talk about expensive vacations or fashionable restaurants or the kind of things people usually mention when they are trying to impress someone. She talked about her grandmother, who had raised her after her mother died when she was 14. She told me that her grandmother used to say that a person's character could be measured by how they treated someone who had nothing to offer them. She told me she worked as an overnight hospital cleaner most weeks, although that particular day she had been asked to cover a daytime shift. She was saving money to finish a nursing program she had abandoned years earlier because her grandmother had become ill. As she spoke, she kept apologizing for talking too much, and every time she apologized, I found myself liking her more. Then she asked about my family. I told her about my sister and my parents, who lived 40 minutes outside the city. I told her my father had been a mechanic for most of his life and my mother still brought food to neighbors whenever someone was sick. Eliana smiled and said, your mother sounds like someone who would feed a person before asking why they were hungry." I laughed because she was exactly right. Then she became quiet and asked about my previous relationship. I hesitated. My engagement had ended when my fiancée, Lauren, admitted she had been seeing someone else. I had spent months blaming myself, wondering whether my constant work had pushed her away, until I finally realized betrayal was a choice, not a punishment I had earned. I told Eliana I was still learning how to trust people again. She looked down at her hands and whispered that she understood. I thought that was the most vulnerable moment of our date. I was wrong. When we finished lunch, I reached for the check, but Eliana immediately protested. She insisted on paying half, saying she had never liked feeling indebted to anyone. I told her it wasn't a debt. She shook her head and said, "You don't understand. People are generous when they want something from you. Then later, they remind you what you owe them." The sentence landed differently than everything else she had said. There was pain beneath it, old and carefully hidden. I asked her who had made her feel that way, but she smiled and said it was nothing. She thanked me for the afternoon and said she should get back to work. Before she walked away, I asked if I could see her again. She stared at me for several seconds before saying, "You really mean that?" I told her I did. For the next few weeks, Eliana and I met whenever our schedules allowed. Sometimes we had coffee. Sometimes we walked through a farmer's market. Once, she brought sandwiches to a public park because she said restaurants were unnecessary when the weather was good. She never tried to impress me, and somehow that made every ordinary moment feel extraordinary. She remembered how I liked my coffee. She noticed when I was tired. She asked about my father after his knee started bothering him. When my sister met her, Marissa hugged her within 5 minutes and later told me, "You finally found someone who makes you stop looking at your phone." But there was something Eliana wouldn't tell me. Every time I mentioned meeting her family, she became uncomfortable. Whenever her phone rang while we were together, she checked the screen and silenced it. And sometimes, when we were laughing, I would catch a shadow cross her face so quickly that I wondered whether I had imagined it. I wanted to ask, but I was afraid of becoming another person who demanded answers before earning trust. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I was leaving my office when I saw Eliana standing across the street. She was still wearing her blue uniform, but she wasn't alone. A man in a gray jacket was standing in front of her, speaking angrily. I couldn't hear every word, but I saw Eliana step backward. The man grabbed her wrist. I crossed the street immediately. When he noticed me approaching, he released her and walked away without saying another word. Eliana looked terrified. I asked who he was. She said, "My brother." I had never known she had a brother. She tried to explain, but her eyes filled with tears before the words came. She finally told me the truth she had been carrying for years. Her younger brother, Adrian, had struggled with addiction and had repeatedly borrowed money from her, promising to change. She had spent her savings helping him enter treatment twice. Each time he disappeared, returned, apologized, and asked for more. Their grandmother had left them a small house, and after her death, Eliana had refused to sell it because it was the only place that still felt like home. Adrian wanted her to sell it and give him the money. When she refused, he began threatening her. But there was more. Eliana pulled an envelope from her bag and handed it to me. Inside was a legal notice. Adrian had somehow claimed that their grandmother had promised him the house. He was challenging Eliana's ownership. She had been trying to fight it alone while working 2 jobs and saving for school. She hadn't told me because she was afraid I would think she was looking for someone to rescue her. I asked her why she hadn't trusted me. Her answer broke something inside me. Because the last man who said he loved me told me I was too much work. She looked away, ashamed of the tears running down her face. He said I had family problems, money problems, and dreams that would never happen. He said a man shouldn't have to carry someone else's burdens. I stood there speechless because I knew exactly what it felt like to be abandoned by someone who had promised to stay. The difference was that Eliana had turned her pain inward. She had started believing every cruel thing someone had ever said about her. I told her I couldn't solve her legal problems, and I wouldn't pretend I could. But I could stand beside her while she solved them herself. She shook her head, crying harder, saying she didn't want pity. I told her it wasn't pity. It was partnership. Then I said something my father had told me years earlier: you don't measure love by how little trouble someone brings into your life. You measure it by whether you're willing to stand there when trouble comes. For the first time, Eliana let herself cry without apologizing. The weeks that followed were difficult. She met with a legal aid attorney. She gathered old documents, photographs, receipts, and letters from her grandmother. Adrian continued pressuring her, but slowly, the truth became impossible to ignore. The house had been legally left to Eliana. Her grandmother's handwritten letter, discovered inside an old cookbook, made her wishes unmistakable. She wanted Eliana to keep the home and use it to build the future she had postponed for everyone else. But the greatest surprise came when Adrian finally showed up at Eliana's workplace and asked to speak with her. I wasn't there when it happened. Later, she told me he was shaking. He admitted he had lied about the house because he was desperate for money. He had relapsed, and he was terrified of losing everything. He expected Eliana to scream at him. Instead, she told him she couldn't keep rescuing him. She told him she loved him, but love did not mean allowing him to destroy her life. She offered to help him find treatment again, but only if he accepted responsibility for his own recovery. Adrian broke down and apologized. It wasn't a magical ending, and Eliana knew it. Recovery would take time. Trust would take even longer. But for the first time, she had chosen boundaries without choosing hatred. I watched her become stronger over the months that followed. She enrolled in her nursing program again. She kept working, but she reduced her hours. She began restoring her grandmother's old house, room by room. And one Saturday afternoon, while we were painting the kitchen walls, she stopped, looked around, and started crying. I asked what was wrong. She smiled through her tears and said, "My grandmother used to tell me that someday I would come home to a life I didn't have to apologize for." I put down the paintbrush and took her hand. "You don't have to apologize anymore." She squeezed my fingers and whispered, "Not even for the uniform?" I smiled. "Especially not for the uniform." A year after our first date, we returned to the same restaurant. This time Eliana wasn't wearing her work clothes. She wore a simple green dress and the small silver necklace her grandmother had left her. But when we sat down, she looked at me and laughed, remembering how terrified she had been that first day. She told me she almost turned around and left. I asked what made her stay. She said, "Because you looked at me like I was already enough." I told her the truth. I hadn't known she was enough that day. I had simply been willing to find out who she was before deciding what she was worth. Then I reached into my pocket and placed a small box on the table. Eliana stared at it, then at me, her hands trembling. Inside was a simple ring. I told her I didn't want a perfect life with her. I wanted a real one. A life with difficult mornings, unexpected bills, family problems, ordinary afternoons, laughter in the kitchen, forgiveness when we made mistakes, and the courage to choose each other again when life became difficult. She cried before I finished. And when she finally said yes, she didn't ask whether I was sure. She already knew. Speech balloon special request: before the story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this situation? If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating stories that touch hearts around the world. Years later, whenever someone asked me how I met my wife, I never said it was a blind date. I said I met a woman who thought she had to apologize for the clothes she wore, the family she came from, the dreams she had postponed, and the scars life had given her. And somehow, on that ordinary afternoon, she taught me something I had spent years forgetting: love is not about finding someone without problems. It is about finding someone whose heart makes you willing to face the problems together. Sometimes the person sitting across from you isn't asking to be rescued. They are simply hoping someone will look beyond the uniform, beyond the mistakes, beyond the fear, and say, "I still want this." Because everyone deserves at least one moment when they realize they don't have to earn kindness by being perfect. Sometimes a second chance begins with something as simple as staying at the table.